Fear Factor, 15 Minutes to Your Ideal Retirement, Webinar 8. How many thousands per month tax-free do you want? And can you really stack the deck in your favor? Hello, this is Adrienne Berg with financial advisor Ronald Gielach, answering your questions in a 12-part webinar series on how to retire and live the life you love and deserve. This is the 8th webinar in our series, and you can find the other 7 at ronaldgielach.com. That's G-E-L-O-K. In the preceding webinar, we discussed why we fear to think outside the box and instead follow the herd. In this webinar, we go further and ask, how many thousands per month tax-free do you want? Can we really stack the deck of cards in our favor? Ron, thanks for being with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here again, Adrienne.
So, Ron, let's go right to that question. Can we stack the cards in our favor? We always feel like we're losing out.
Yeah, we absolutely can if we know what to do. The problem for so many of us is we don't know what to do. So we kind of follow the herd, and sometimes following the herd can lead right over the side of a cliff, you know? And it's interesting because we just did another one of our client appreciation dinners because, as you know, Adrienne, we don't advertise, we educate. And a client came up to me, gave me a big bear hug last night. He had tears in his eyes, and he said, you know, Ron, he says, I got to tell you, he says, meeting you was an answer to prayer. And quite frankly, I was humbled and I was overwhelmed by him telling me this. But what's so interesting is what we did for this client is we set up a tax-free income plan for him years ago. And what we did it is, why we did it is his objective was he wanted to create a stream of income that would be tax-free that he could rely upon. And so what we did is we kind of looked where our expertise comes in, which is dealing with little-known provisions in the tax code, and we structured an unbelievable program using Index Life to generate a tax-free income for him. And here's how we did it. And I don't want to necessarily let out every detail of the secret sauce, but what we did is we said, okay, first we looked and said, well, is there a need for any type of death benefit protection? And we established that there was some. Secondly, we designed the plan where we said, well, let's have a plan in place where we can drop our death benefit in a few years down to a lower level so we can dramatically slash costs internally in the program. We used what's called Index Life, where we've got multiple index-linked interest strategies to choose from, some with earnings caps as high as 17% per year. So we're accumulating cash value in this plan. He's got the ability to access the money through tax-free policy loans, and he's getting spendable money every year. And granted, you know, it's going to be deducted from the death benefit at the ultimate, you know, payout of the death benefit. But for his purposes, where he said, look, I want something that can generate tax-free spendable distributions, and I want to think outside the box beyond what municipal bonds can do for me. And that's what we did for him.
So he's actually borrowing out his own money. Of course, that's tax-free, right? At the same time, he's earning money on anything that he hasn't borrowed with a guaranteed floor and with a fairly high cap. I mean, if he's making that much, the cap is something we all wish we could actually achieve. But I understand that there's actually a provision, and you're the one who taught me this, Ron, that even on the money he's borrowed, under certain circumstances, he could stack the deck in his favor and actually earn money on the money he's borrowed out and using. Now, if it's not too complicated, I would love for our listeners to understand that particular feature, whether they decide to go for a feature like that or not.
Well, I don't think it's too complicated, but you know what happens is we're used to what we're used to. So if you think about it, when we first heard about the concept of a mutual fund, When we first heard it, it sounded complicated to us. So when we first hear the concept of tax-advantaged indexed life and flexibility in loans and variable rate loans and fixed rate loans, it can seem like a jumble at first. But if you're working with advisors who know this area, who are willing to take the time with you to educate you and bring you up to speed on it, a lot can be accomplished. So to answer your question specifically, we like programs that have the choice where a client can say 1 year, you know what, if I've got a choice of a fixed rate loan at, say, 1% for the first 10 years and a tenth of percent interest thereafter, I might use that in certain years, and we would kind of indicate to them what type of years that might make the most sense. But the variable rate loan concept is really, really interesting, where a person could say, well, you know what, I could have a debit, for example, or a charge of 4%, and I could pull $30,000 as a tax-free policy loan, and okay, there's this debit of 4%. But that same $30,000, if it earned index-linked interest of 8%, would have a positive 4% credit. It's an absolute mind blower. And people say, well, wait a minute, tell me that again. That's almost like walking into the bank and saying to the banker, listen, I'd like to take a loan, and I'd like you to pay me interest on the amount of the loan that I'm walking out of here with. It's
Well,
thinking,
actually, this works very well in low interest rate environments like we're in now, where the stock market and the indexes that are linked to them are doing very well. There's a net gain by borrowing. It's not so unusual. It's just that people don't think that way. Actually, in Europe, many, many people borrow money in one country because interest rates on borrowing are low, and they deposit their borrowing in another country that has higher interest rates. Happens all the time. It's called an interest rate sandwich. But this is what we mean by stacking the deck in our favor by thinking out of the box.
well, sure. You know, sometimes that same interest rate sandwich is referred to by a little fancier term as a favorable arbitrage.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about this is you correctly note that this concept works beautifully in a low interest rate environment. And then people have said to me, Ron, what if I put this plan in place and things change in 10 or 15 years from now, we're in a high interest rate environment? And I go, well, what if we could bring a system or a product forth that had a cap on the loan rate? Would that then make sense for you? They go, well, yeah, of course. Is there such a thing? And I go, well, yeah, there is. But this is why people will turn to us, because they'll say, you know, you might know a little bit more than I know about certain things. And it's just like, how can I put it? Knowledge has just gotten so specialized in our society today, you know, and what we bring to the table is what I would call the right know-how for today's times.
Yes, Ronald Gillick and Associates logo is and slogan is trust and know-how. And this is clearly the know-how part. We'll get to the trust part in a moment. So when we talk about stacking the deck in our favor, we're really not talking about pie in the sky or things that are too good to be true or taking risks. What we're talking about is basic solid knowledge and somebody who can guide you through with that. Now let's take the trust part, because the other part of this webinar is a question. How much tax-free income do you need? That really is a very fundamental question that the client has to answer. But how do you guide them? How do you gain their trust and guide them through making a very major life decision? How much tax-free income do you need?
Well, you know, Adrian, trust is something that's earned over time. So what we do is invest an extraordinary amount of time with prospective clients. So, for example, the very first interaction they may have with us is almost like a diagnostic interaction. We may be, it's kind of like when they go to the doctor's office. The doctor can't guess how to solve or deal with your ailment if you don't share what your condition is. So in our first interaction with somebody, we're going to ask them a lot of questions, totally confidentially, of course, about what's important to them, what's their situation, what level of assets do they have to work with. And then in our second interaction, which is going to be a separate interaction, we're then going to present, well, here's our ideas, here's our recommendations, not for purposes of them plunging into anything, but to get an understanding of what might be a really better way for them to go. And then in our third interaction, we're going to have kind of a question and answer session / implementation meeting where if all questions are answered to the client's satisfaction, then and only then are we moving forward. So we have a process that's tried and true that we take prospective clients through, and it's very relaxing. It's very reassuring. I mean, I can't guarantee everybody who goes through that process that we can help them, but I can guarantee that they come away a lot better informed about their situation and their options. And what's so nice with today's technology, if somebody says, hey, you know what, it's really not convenient for me to get to your main office in Parsippany in New Jersey, guess what? We can do this completely via Skype, via the internet, via Federal Express. That's the beauty of today's technology.
And we go even further because if you do go to the website, ronaldgielach.com, and you click on the webinar and seminar section, and by the way, there you're going to find live seminars. And if you're in the area, please register for those, and they are also complimentary. But you will also find some paperwork, very streamlined, simple paperwork. If you'd really like to create your retirement future in 15 minutes, fill out those sheets and get them to us. You'll see instructions on how to do that. And have an in-office or virtual conference with Ron Gielach and Associates, and then you'll really be able to start on that guidance where trust is built, questions are answered, and questions are asked. And it won't take long at all to fill out those papers. Now, let's get back to stacking the cards in our favor. You've talked about tax-free money machine systems and how they work. Before we end, there are certain features that really sound like we're stacking the deck in our favor, things like the floor, the borrowing, but just repeat them so that we understand and get familiar with hearing these kinds of benefits we never hear about in connection with buying a stock or a mutual fund or even a death benefit insurance policy. These are unique, and I think it's worth, Ron, for you repeating some of them again so that we can absorb the fact that we can stack the deck in our favor and make controlled decisions as to how much tax-free money we can get during our retirement years.
Sure. Just to recap, the whole idea is, number one, we want to be in a control position. So what is it that we want to control? When I say we, I'm talking the client, right? We want to be able to control loss, limit loss, and we want to be able to control or limit taxes. Now, you might say, well, we can't limit taxes. We're not the legislatures writing the tax laws. But if we use financial vehicles that have favorable tax code provisions associated with them, then in effect that's exactly what we're doing. So the whole idea of a properly structured system here for tax-free income is to say, well, what if we utilize an indexed life policy and we custom design it in such a way as to limit the mortality charges or cost of insurance by limiting the death benefit to the amount that's appropriate? What if we custom design this to allow enough time for the cash value to grow using index-linked interest where we've got some reasonable caps on the upside, 13, 14, 17%, depending on the program. We keep what we make in good years. We avoid losing any of the index-linked interest gains to our cash value in the bad years, and we're able to comfortably draw tax-free policy loans which create real spendable dollars for us to supplement our other income in retirement. It's a win-win.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's a win-win, Adrienne.
It is a win-win, and it's refreshing to see that there is a way to feel secure about our retirement future, because we're not getting the best news from the media right now, particularly for us baby boomers. And for you, if you're ready to spend the 15 minutes it takes to get the fear out of retirement and stop running with the herd, you can start right now. It's very simple. You can have a complimentary consultation. You can fill out some of those forms. You can have the consultation without filling out the streamlined forms, as Ron mentioned. You can also register for our next webinar. It's called, Is There Really a Way to Keep What's Earned in the Good Years and Not Lose in the Bad Years? This is part of stacking the deck in your favor. So you can do all three. Listen to our past webinars, get your complimentary consultation, and register for our next webinar at ronaldgelok.com. That's G-E-L-O-K. Thanks for being with us, Ron.
Oh, it's been a pleasure to be here.